You might be surprised, but trying to activate your vagus nerve from the wrong spot could be like trying to tune your piano by randomly pounding keys. Now, what do I mean by that? Basically, we know from our past history and scientific information that activating your vagus nerve via neck can lead to some unwanted and even serious side effects. And I'll explain all of that in a moment. But first, I wanted to let you know that this video is sponsored by a company that produces vagus nerve activation devices that activate your vagus nerve via the auricular branch of your vagus nerve. So the branch of the vagus nerve that innervates your ear. If you're interested in such a device, the link for a discount is available in the description below. And we're going to be talking about in this video why auricular branch appears to be safer method and more precise. We're going to explain that in detail, and we're going to talk about why we want to activate our vagus nerve always on the left side. And I can tell you it's not because you want to improve your sense of humor, it's because of the fact that it has better outcomes in terms of what it does to your inner functions, inner organ functions. And we will also explain how is it that by activating your vagus nerve that goes into your ear, you can actually affect a function of your other organs. And we'll explain right away the history. How do we know that vagus nerve activation via your neck leads to issues? My name is Dr. Mikkel Rashek of Merogenomics. Let's get going with that. So how do we know that? Is because vagus nerve activation for treatment of different conditions has already been approved by FDA in the US for numerous conditions. The very first time it was approved for treatment of difficult to treat epilepsy, but that was approved via invasive method. So what do I mean by that? Basically, you had to implant this ring or cuff around your vagus nerve in your neck. This was then, which basically had like little electrodes touching your vagus nerve. This had a wire going all the way to your chest, and in your chest you had a device implanted that would provide the electric signal for the device inside your neck. So this was approved for the first time in 1997. This was followed by a, again, invasive method approval in 2005 for difficult to treat depression. Next one was again invasive method in 2015 for the treatment of morbid obesity. And then the latest one was in 2021 for treatment of strokes, rehabilitation post-stroke. If you had a stroke and the symptoms are not improving over time, that's another method as well. And I can tell you that non-invasive stimulation of the vagus nerve, meaning there is no implants of any kind, that's coming. In fact, it has already started. And the very first one has also been approved in 2017 for, I believe it was called episodic cluster headache. This was followed by 2019 for migraine. Both of these are very painful headache conditions that just have different manifestations. But in this case, again, you need to hold the device targeting your vagus nerve on your neck. And again, it kind of depends on whether the person holds it appropriately or not. And from all of these ways and methods of activating the vagus nerve, we have learned that side effects are unfortunately quite common to a point that it limits the treatment effect. And the most common problems is activation of neck muscles to a point that and this is probably seen in somewhere like around 2/3 of all patients. And what happens, it creates difficulty breathing, coughing, voice change, and it can be quite intolerable. But there's even more serious side effects, and the most serious are the ones that affect your heart. So what is seen as serious bradycardia, meaning slowing down of your heart rate, or flatlining, which of course could even be potentially fatal. And this is how we learned that we want to be activating the left side of your vagus nerve, not the right one, because by activating the right side of your vagus nerve, you're much more likely to induce those unwanted serious cardiac side effects, such as that bradycardia or flatlining. And this has now spilled over to even the non-invasive activation of your vagus nerve via your left ear. In one of the future episodes, we're going to learn whether that's even necessary if you're activating your vagus nerve via ear or not. So stay tuned for that. So in today's episode, we're going, why did I even want to do this video? It's because the company sent me this article and said, hey, Mikolai, could you do a video on this? And I said, sure, no problem. By the way, it's a very well written article. It's short, so check it out. It's the link is available in the video description as well. But I wasn't just interested in wanting to tell you what the article said. I was interested in the scientific references. How did they support their claims? And I've decided to make a mini video series just looking over their references, how that company scientists are supporting their claims. And it's fascinating information. I already did one video in the series which compared the effectiveness of using a device versus natural methods of activating your vagus nerve. So check that out. And today we'll talk about the potential neck issues. And there will be more videos to come afterwards as well. So we're going to talk about two references that were included in that article. And both of them discussed why these side effects are created for a couple of different reasons. Reference number one talked about how you could be causing these side effects because of activation of smooth muscle cells that surround the blood network that surrounds the vagus nerve or is actually involved inside the vagus nerve. And the other one talks about activation of actual motor neurons that innervate your neck directly, which actually come from the vagus nerve itself. So the very first reference was published in 2018. I've already studied that reference before for the creation of my video on the vagus nerve anatomy. So check that out. And perhaps I should end, I mean, it's cool to come back to it. I'm going to show you some pictures from that reference today as well. But I gotta give you a trigger warning. If you have a trypophobia, which is discomfort of seeing many different dots in one location, then warning, because we're going to look at images of vagus nerve inside, cut across the vagus nerve. And vagus nerve is basically composed of thousands of different nerve fibers. So, and they can branch out into like separate wires, and of course they start to go out into different body parts, right? So if you cut across the vagus nerve though, then what you end up seeing is these tiny little points. So if you have that trypophobia, this will be potentially unpleasant to you. If you don't know if you do or not, then keep watching and you'll find out, I guess. So the very first paper was published already in 2018, but these guys wanted to investigate the anatomy of the vagus nerve. They called it morphometric data, meaning basically what does the vagus nerve look like, its shape, its size, its structure. And the reason why is because historically there's claimed that vagus nerve is very similar between people found in very similar location, and therefore it's easy to proceed with that surgical procedure where you implant the device. But it turned out that that's not really the case, and therefore that information was still missing. They wanted to supplement that information, and therefore they studied the vagus nerve in 27 different cadavers. So the first image we're going to see is this image of the vagus nerve, and right away you can see that image shows the entire vagus nerve. We're cutting across it, and you can see there's these big bundles inside there. These are called fascicles, and basically there's two types of nerve fibers that go through your vagus nerve: the ones that go from your brainstem to the rest of your body, as well as the ones that go through the body, from your body to your brainstem. It's a two-highway communication system between your brain and your organs. And these nerve fibers, like I mentioned, there's thousands of them, and they are assembled in these fascicles. And you can see there's few fascicles in that nerve. Another thing you'll see, and they're pointing it out with arrows, are the vessels, blood vessels. So you see these little holes that can bring blood. You can see them. They are either right inside the vagus nerve in between the fascicles, as well as some of them are in the fascicles themselves. And when they studied these cadavers, they did mention the blood network innervating vagus nerve can be quite rich. One thing they mention is that the branching of the vagus nerve can be, they've observed branching in almost 15% of the individuals they studied. The next thing they mention is that the location of the vagus nerve. They looked at the vagus nerve at the area of where my Adam's apple would be, so in the neck, and typically the vagus nerve was about 36 millimeters away from the skin. So quite deep, but it actually ranged dramatically between person to person. It ranged from 20 millimeters all the way to 60 millimeters. So the positioning of the vagus nerve, predicting the position of your vagus nerve inside your neck is like trying to predict the weather. It's that variable. What's interesting, they mention, is that the location of your vagus nerve away from the skin correlated with the thickness of the vagus nerve, meaning the deeper the vagus nerve was away from the skin, the thicker or fatter it was. So that's one correlation they saw, which was really interesting. I wonder why. Maybe I'll find out in my future studies. The second thing that they noticed is that the older individual was, the smaller the vagus nerve would be. And this has been observed in the past via ultrasound studies as well. And the older the person, also the thicker the sheath surrounding the vagus nerve. Ooh, I wonder if we can see the bald eagle. Can I catch it? There it is. Oh, too late. Beautiful. But sorry, couldn't see it. So that's another very cool thing. The next thing they mention is that on average, there was 5 fascicles inside the vagus nerve, but again, it ranged dramatically from 1 fascicle all the way to 21. And whether you had, how many fascicles you had, again, correlated with the size of your vagus nerve. So the bigger the vagus nerve you had, the more fascicles you would have, and the more blood network you would have. And this is where they mention most likely where potentially the side effects come in, because when you activate your vagus nerve via neck, you might be inadvertently activating the smooth muscles around the blood network, and that might be one of the contributing factors towards the side effects. All right, so now we're going to move to the next paper, which was more recent from 2023, where they analyzed vagus nerve inside pigs. Now, why pigs? Is because pig's vagus nerve is the one that most closely resembles that of the human vagus nerve. So what we know from the past, from all of these activations of the vagus nerve via neck, is that one of the things that happens is you indiscriminately activate both the vagus nerve fibers that go from your brainstem to the body, as well as from the body to your brainstem. And the ones you want to activate specifically are the ones that go from your body to your brainstem, and not the other way around. Why is that? Because your brainstem sends out 2 types of vagus nerve fibers. There are the ones that are parasympathetic nerve fibers that work on your different organs, and they originate from a specific location of your brainstem called dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus. And there's another type, which are motor neurons. They activate muscles, and these originate from the brainstem location called nucleus ambiguus, and they specifically function by manipulating how muscles respond, and they innervate your neck, your head, and especially your neck muscles can be activated, as well as some of the ones of your heart. And what happens there is, when it was discovered that the placement of that invasive cuff in your neck, where you place that ends up correlating to some degree with how likely the person was going to see side effects. So the authors wanted to know, can we determine the placement of these electrical device that they were putting, and the one that they were using, the cuff that was being placed around the vagus nerve, had 6 contact points, and they wanted to know, can we determine the position of that in order to get the desired effect, which was affect the heart rate, versus minimize the undesired effect, which is the activation of the neck muscles. So the vagus nerve neurons that activate muscles inside your neck. And they decided to do it in pigs. And before I go on, a little bit of background, look, neuronal makeup background. So remember, neurons, they have like a big head with a crown on it. So let's talk about the crown. Crown is like they're called dendrites. They collect information from other neurons, that they receive information from other neurons and they send it to the head. The head is the widest part of neuron. That's called cell body or somata. That's where the nucleus is, and which is like the brains of the cell and all the other organelles. And then you have axon. An axon can send signal to other neurons or other type of cells. And both dendrites as well as axons can be very long in their distance, even spanning like meters in length, depending on the makeup of where the neuron is located. Okay, so that's basically the names. Now, in terms of how the vagus nerve is structured, so I mentioned that there is nerve fibers that go from your brainstem to the body. Those are called efferent fibers, nerve fibers. And then there's fibers that go from your body to your brain, and those are called afferent fibers. Okay, and they run side by side. They don't cross-communicate with each other, but they run in a parallel to one another inside the nerve. Now, the ones that afferent ones, the ones that go from your body to the brain, eventually they coalesce via those wide parts of the nerve in an area in your neck called nodose ganglion. So it's this bulgy part where you see all of those somatas or cell bodies. So that's where all of the nucleus of all the neurons, thousands of these neurons that come from your body all the way to your vagus nerve inside your neck, and they have this big bulgy part there called nodose ganglion, and these neurons can cross-communicate with one another. So like, for example, one from the heart would be like, hey buddy, check out what I found out from the heart, and it can communicate that information to, say, a branch of the vagus nerve that was collecting information from the gut. Okay, so that's nodose ganglion. And the reason why I mentioned that is because when they took these pigs, they implanted these devices inside their neck so that they could measure the performance, and they measured how the activation of that device affected both their heart rate as well as their neck muscles. And then afterwards, they sacrificed the animals and they studied the anatomical design of the vagus nerve itself. So they studied the cuff itself was close to that nodose ganglion, and they were able to study the design of the vagus nerve from that nodose ganglion all the way to where that cuff was, which was about 1 centimeter in length. And they took few hundred slices of the vagus nerve in between, in that 1 centimeter span, to see what the vagus nerve looks like. And they showed this amazing picture where they give us 6 examples from the nodose ganglion. You can see number 1, nodose ganglion. You can see this big bulgy part, big circle. That's where all the cell bodies of all these neurons coming from the body towards the brainstem are coalescing, and you see this big white circle, and they can communicate with each other. Next to that, you see other bundles, and those are the efferent ones. So they subdivided the afferent ones from the efferent ones by this blue line, dotted line. And then they follow this from the nodose ganglion down to where the placement of the electric device was. And you can see how that big part in the nodose ganglion starts branching out, producing smaller, what you can think of like wires. And you can see basically how the vagus nerve starts branching out immediately past that nodose ganglion that I was telling you about. And at the very bottom, slide number 6, the one that I was closest to that electric device that was implanted, they zoomed in and they showed that the efferent fibers, the one going from your brain to the body, they're bigger, they're wider in diameter, and they're myelinated. And therefore, because they're bigger in size, they're also easier to activate versus the one that are afferent, going from the body to the brain. They're smaller in diameter, and you can see that. And some of them are myelinated versus some are unmyelinated. Check out my past video on the vagus nerve anatomy to find out what that really means and why that's cool and important. I'll skip that at this moment. All right, so that's basically shows you the makeup of the vagus nerve. And why that is important is because once they collected the information on how they were activating the vagus nerve and how that affected the heart rate versus neck activation, they studied then the position of these contacts or these electrodes around the vagus nerve. And what they noticed is following that where the electrodes were positioned affected the activation of these efferent motor neurons, so the vagus nerve neurons that were activating the muscles in your neck. And they showed this very cool image showing these 6 contacts, and they mapped it, they color coded so that the darker the circle, which each circle represented one of those 6 contacts, the closer it was to those efferent fibers, the ones that activated neck muscles. And you can also see a rim between those 6 contacts, and that's a heat map of showing you how easy it was to activate the efferent fibers, the one that activated your neck muscles. And basically, it shows you how much current was needed to activate them. And the closer the contact was to the efferent fibers, the less current was needed, makes sense, to activate the efferent fibers. And the further away it was, the more current was needed. And again, it's color-coded. The darker the color in that rim, basically means the less current was needed in order to be able to activate these efferent fibers. And what they noticed is that every animal that they studied, you always ended up activating those neck muscles, and there wasn't much current differentiation between the closest contacts and the furthest away contacts. It was only maybe 60% at most. But what's interesting is that when it comes to affecting heart rate, that was very sensitive. So there was a lot of variation, and some of the positioning of the contacts in every animal they studied always induced severe bradycardia, meaning very few heartbeats, somewhere around 10 heartbeats per minute. What's even interesting is that in one animal, depending on how they were turning on the device, they either caused bradycardia or tachycardia, which is tachycardia was activation of lots of more heartbeats. And the reason why that happened is they think is because there was another nerve fiber that was running along the vagus nerve that would not be expected there from another part of the brain, which was activated because of the placement of around the vagus nerve and caused that tachycardia. So the take-home message was that the current needed to affect those neck fibers of the vagus nerve that activate your vagus nerve, it was just too easy. You could not affect your heart without affecting those neck as well. So that's why potentially activating your vagus nerve might almost lead to unavoidable side effects. So that was basically the conclusion. So what does that mean in terms of activating your vagus nerve via neck through your skin? Now, because you need to activate your vagus nerve, and this is now from another article, also in one of the references that they included, but I'll discuss this in another video in this series. Basically, one of the articles that the authors were discussing, they mentioned, look, because if you're activating vagus nerve via skin, that's called transcutaneous activation, you need more current because of the location of the vagus nerve inside your neck. And even if you try to target vagus nerve that's the closest to the surface of your neck, that's somewhere around one centimeter, even that can have a variation, obviously. because you're not touching the vagus nerve directly, you need more current in order to activate it. And because of the fact that at that point, vagus nerve has those efferent motor fibers, the ones that move the muscles, including your neck, as well as your heart, if you're looking on the right side of the vagus nerve. Whether this way is actually truly self is still in question. And they mentioned that needs to be more studied, because there's definitely studies that have been done in the past that did bilateral activation of the vagus nerve via the skin, transcutaneous vagus nerve activation on both sides, and that definitely have resulted in some of those hard side effects that you don't want. So that definitely needs more studies. Now, what about the auricular branch, and why is that better method, and why I believe sooner or later we're going to see approval of using that method for treatments of different conditions. It's going to win over. Why is that? Because remember I mentioned that nodose ganglion, the one where the widest parts of the neurons that have the nucleus come together from your body in part of your neck. Very close to that is another ganglion, meaning again, the parts of the neurons, the widest parts of the neuron that have nucleus, and it's called jugular ganglion. That one does not communicate with the nodose ganglion. It's a separate one, and it collects information of your vagus nerve that innervates your head and your neck, including the one in your ear. In fact, that jugular ganglion gives birth to the auricular branch of your vagus nerve, the one that goes right into your ear. All of that afterwards goes into your brainstem, and it terminates in an area called spinal trigeminal nucleus. A spinal trigeminal nucleus then processes that information and sends it back to another region of your brainstem called nucleus ambiguus, and nucleus ambiguus creates those efferent fibers that goes to your neck as well, and part of it to your heart, remember? So they communicate. Now remember, you have those also vagus nerve fibers that come from your body. They coalesce together in that nodose ganglion where the nuclei are, and they cross-communicate and then go to your brainstem, and they terminate in an area called nucleus of the solitary tract. Check out my past videos where I discuss these in more detail, including the one on the vagus nerve anatomy, as well as how your brain and gut are interconnected via vagus nerve. Now, nucleus of the solitary tract then communicates with another region of your brainstem, which is that dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus, as well as that nucleus ambiguus. And it cross-communicates with all of the information that spinal trigeminal nucleus receives from the second branch of your vagus nerve. So because there's like a conference call between them, you can activate your vagus nerve right in your ear and affect how all of your organs function. Now, why this is of interest to us is because of the fact that if you activate your vagus nerve via the auricular branch, specifically, there's a couple regions that are most frequently used. One is the tragus, this part right here. That's the device that I'm promoting. Activates the vagus nerve via this. So it's very, very cool, easy way to do it. And the other one is, I think it's called concha. Now, concha is specifically innervated by the auricular branch of your vagus nerve. So it's very clean. Now, your tragus has other nerves as well in it that you also could be activating, some of your facial nerves, for example, or ear canal. However, there is no reported side effects from cross-activating those nerves. And therefore, what it means is that when you activate your vagus nerve via the auricular branch, it's very clean and very targeted. And this is how you can activate your vagus nerve, positively influence how your body organs without any of those cardiac and neck side effects that you're seeing with the currently approved methods. And this is why I think this will be the winning method and the one that eventually will lead to approvals for for treatment of different conditions, and we'll see how long it will take, but I think it's definitely coming, because that's the anatomy that explains why it's such a clean method. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up right here. As you can see, very cool information, and why we still need to collect information in terms of how safe it truly is in order to activate your vagus nerve via neck through your skin, because clearly past evidence suggests that it might be problematic. And in the meantime, in one of the future episodes, I'll talk about the safety of activating your vagus nerve via the auricular branch, and it looks really, really promising. Okay, please subscribe if you haven't already to my channel, especially if you want more information such as the ones like on vagus nerve that I'm providing you with today. Give a comment, give us a like. This is how we grow. And also, please check out my Patreon account as well. I have some extra information there that does not make it to YouTube. Some of it is free, some of it is not. But if you're a patron, supporting patron member, paying patron member, then you have access to everything, and you also get to decide which content makes it to YouTube, except the sponsored content. All right, so I'll see you guys next time, and bye for now.